Dr. James Smith there. Well, to hear the Israeli government's explanation of the strikes in southern Gaza, earlier I spoke to David Mencer, spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Thanks for joining us on the show once again, David. I just want to start with the incident on Sunday night. The British Foreign Secretary David Cameron has called for a swift and comprehensive investigation into how 45 people died following an Israeli airstrike in Rafah. What can you tell us about what happened?
So firstly, Katrina, thank you very much for having me on. The Israeli army this afternoon released its preliminary results of its investigation, and what they found that while, of course, we maintain the highest standards of making sure that all of our intelligence is completely correct to make sure that we don't harm civilians as we go after the terrorist masterminds. These two individuals in this case were terrorists that masterminded attacks in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. While we were extremely meticulous, making sure there were no civilians in the area, what the investigation has found out is that what we did not know, was that there seems to have been an arms cache, an arms dump in the Hamas compound where these two were meeting to plan their next terrorist attack. And it seems that even though two very small munitions, two of the smallest munitions that the Israeli has in its possession, targeted these two individuals and eliminated them, thus preventing any of their further terrorist activities. Unfortunately, the munitions that we didn't know were there seem to have caught fire, and that from the fire, unfortunately, civilians have been hurt and killed, which we are extremely sorry about. The Prime Minister described this as a tragedy. It is, of course, a tragedy when any civilian is killed, caught up in this dreadful war that we didn't start. But of course, ultimately, all casualties in this war must lay firmly at the feet of Hamas.
David, just to come back to something you said there, you said you made sure there were no civilians in the area, but Rafah is one of the most densely populated parts of the earth at the moment. So many people have been displaced there. So clearly there were civilians in the area, and 45 of them are reportedly dead now.
So first thing on what you just said, those are Hamas figures. You know, we wouldn't take figures from ISIS or from Al-Qaeda. So it's a mystery to me and all of us here in Israel why anyone would believe anything which the genocidal murderous organization Hamas says. But it does seem, of course, there were...
Sorry, David, are you saying then that, as far as you're aware, nobody was killed in this incident, that the footage that we're seeing is not of this incident? Is that what you're saying?
Obviously, Katrina, that's not what I'm saying. That's a bit of a ridiculous comment to make to me. So we're saying that the figures are very often inflated by Hamas. Even the United Nations had to eat a good dose of humble pie over the last few days for relying on Hamas figures when they in fact ended up halving them. So Hamas has got a long track record. Look, none of this takes away from the fact that civilians have been killed, and that is certainly tragic, and it's certainly not our intention. But of course, it is the Hamas strategy. Now, this attack took place 1.8 kilometers, that's more than a mile away from where the safe zone in Al-Mawasi, where we asked civilians to move to. We've asked 1 million people, and they have heeded our warnings because we've told them by leaflets in Arabic, with emails, with text messages, with flyers. We've told them to move out of the battle zone, and they have taken our advice, and we're very happy about that. And there they've got access to shelter and food and medical help as well.
Okay, and just to jump in there, David, when you mention Mawasi, both Reuters and AFP are reporting today that Israeli strikes have hit a cluster of tents just exactly there where you're saying the IDF have told people it's safe to move to, and there have been strikes on tents there. What can you tell us about that?
So if the last 2 days has taught us anything, it's not to rely on anything which comes out of Hamas's mouth. They said...
This is Reuters and AFP, sorry to interrupt, David, just for clarity.
And they will be quoting Hamas. So that's what they'll be doing, because there's little news which comes out of Gaza, which is not...
Okay, but what's your, just to get
Hamas.
Your view then, you know, what is your view of what happened there? What's your understanding of what's happened?
We've moved civilians out of harm's way. We've put them in the safe zone in Al-Mawasi, and we're doing our utmost to, of course, make sure that there's food and shelter for them there, and to take care of all of their humanitarian needs. But we're moving them out of harm's way specifically for the reason that we can go after the Hamas, the genocidal, murderous organization of Hamas themselves.
So do you think do you have any information, sorry, just to bring it back to my question, do you have any information on strikes on tents in Al-Mahasi today?
I can tell you categorically that the IDF does not strike tents. The tents which Israel bought and provided for Palestinian civilians and Gazan civilians, we of course do not strike tents. There have been incidences, just in this incident on Sunday evening, where rockets have been fired from us only 45 meters away from the site that we struck on Sunday evening, where we struck these two terrorists. But of course, we go after terrorists and not after civilians. The only people keeping civilians safe right now in Gaza is Israel. It's not Hamas. Hamas wants to maximize civilians.
But just on what Israel is doing and the IDF, we're hearing reports to the BBC from local journalists and from people in Rafah that the IDF has reached the centre of Rafah, that there are Israeli tanks at a number of locations in the centre of Rafah. Can you confirm that to your knowledge?
I can confirm that our intention is to take Rafah, because that's where the last 4 battalions of Hamas exist. And we're going to take the last 4 battalions out, the last quarter strength size of Hamas. It's essential to meet our war aims. So
you're confirming, if I can understand it there, what I asked you about the IDF being in the centre of Rafah as we speak. That's accurate. I can
confirm that we use tanks to fight this genocidal organisation.
Okay, we have to leave it there for the moment. David Mencer, Israeli government spokesperson, thanks for joining us on BBC News.
Thanks, Katrina.